Episode 27 of the WildFed Podcast, Cultural Heritage, Food Security, and COVID-19 with Lori McCarthy is brought to you by Surthrival. Surthrival's product line was designed and developed for moments like these. Our concept is simple: thrive through any circumstances. To that end, we've created a line of supplements that empowers your immune system. Remember, these nationwide shutdowns were never designed to keep you from getting sick forever. Rather, they were just designed to delay your exposure, the so-called flattening of the curve. At some point soon, these stay-at-home orders will end, and many of us will have our immune system challenged in a new way. Make sure you leave home with a stronger immune system than you started with. Surthrival's colostrum, medicinal mushroom formulas, and vitamin D3K2 are all designed to support a robust, adaptable immune system. Find scientifically validated nutrients and superfoods that empower your immunity at surthrival.com. And if you like this podcast, you're going to love the WildFed TV show. You can see episode 1 of the WildFed TV show for free on our website and YouTube channel. So head over to wild-fed.com to check that out. And if you like what you see, use the coupon code HUNKERDOWN for 25% off the rest of the season, or the Director's Cut Bundle Pack, which contains an extra 14 hours of video content. Also, get over to wild-fed.com to check out the WildFed trucker hats in green or hunter orange. They're perfect for the upcoming hunting, fishing, and foraging seasons. I'm Daniel Vitalis, and you're listening to the WildFed Podcast, a show about reconnecting with nature through hunting, fishing, foraging, and food. WildFed. Food is all around you. Today's show is with Lori McCarthy of Newfoundland, Canada, whose time zone is 1.5 hours ahead of mine here in Eastern Standard Time. You heard that right. They stick out into the Atlantic just far enough to warrant an extra 30 minutes of time zone. It's a strange and amazing place with a rich cultural heritage that's inextricably linked to its traditional foods. Lori's a pioneer there, bringing awareness back to the abundant wild foods found both on land and at sea, and utilizing them in a way that fuses the old with the new. She's been a regular on WildFed and the Rewild Yourself podcast, and we even built an episode around her for the upcoming second season of the WildFed TV show. I wanted to see how this current pandemic and the pandemic response has impacted her somewhat remote community. In particular, we narrow in on food security, something I think everyone should be thinking about a bit more than usual right now. I'm of the opinion, and I think Lori would agree, that the solutions to shoring up the cracks in our food supply chains lie in local communities rather than global economies. In addition to the hunting, fishing, and foraging we promote here on the show, it's the individuals practicing decentralized, small-scale regenerative agriculture that are helping to disaster-proof our food systems. I think dependence on globalization for food leads to incredibly weak systems, which under normal circumstances isn't a big problem, but when the system is stressed, it quickly breaks down, and we might just be witnessing some of the early signs of that right now. To that end, Lori's been interviewing elder members of her community to gather and document the stories about food and food culture from before her time. While this project was started at a time when food security was less of an issue and markets were much more stable, it suddenly seems prescient as we face down the consequences of the virus itself and the severe economic consequences resulting from the decision to close our economies. While none of us have a crystal ball and predictions are notoriously difficult in times of chaos, I think most of us sense the very real second and third order impacts that are sure to follow, and our access to the products of a global food economy may be one of the first luxuries we see impacted. Now, I don't mean to sound bleak. We'll survive this, and many of us will thrive through and beyond this crisis. As Lori has spoken about at length in our past interviews, Newfoundland survived the collapse of its all-important cod fishery, the industry upon which its entire economy and way of life was built. And in similar fashion, we'll survive this too. But hopefully this conversation will leave you thinking a bit about creating an anti-fragile lifestyle, one that's rewarding when times are good, and that allows you to prosper when times are tough. So enjoy this conversation with Lori McCarthy. And if you think her big city accent is fun in this interview, you ought to hear her talk to her mom and dad. That's when the real sound of Newfoundland comes out. Lori McCarthy, how are you?
I'm great, man. How are you?
Good. Hey, what's it like up in Newfoundland right now?
Well, believe it or not, the snow is finally left, pretty much. So, there was a 15-foot snowbank just like a week and a half ago. But it's warming up. It's like 5, 6 degrees and sunny. The wild stuff is starting to grow, which is super exciting after 8 months of nothing growing here. It's nice to see green things shoot up.
Yeah, I can relate. It seems like today's, for reference for folks, is April 24th when we're recording of 2020. And we have pretty much the same temperatures right now. And then I think our seasons kind of start to diverge a little bit, but there's a little overlap right now. So we're just seeing stuff start to poke up again too. So, winter
Yeah,
here, same. It's like, well, I guess for us, probably about 6 months. For you guys, about 8 months.
yeah, for sure. We have 3 weeks of summer. Now that's on the east coast of Newfoundland. The west coast of Newfoundland and central certainly gets hotter, and they get they just get an earlier start, an earlier season, and they get actual spring. Our springs are pretty wet, but
Okay.
yeah, we're right on the east
On
coast.
the ocean side, yeah.
Yeah, so next point to land is England. So
Give people a quickly. I know a lot of folks listening have heard you on the show before, but for folks who aren't really geographically aware of Newfoundland, um, you see how like I'm quick to pronounce the land part after having visited you and learned I'm not allowed to say Newfoundland. So, for folks who aren't aware of where Newfoundland is, give us a little bit of geographical education about it.
yeah, so we're an island off the east coast of Canada. Um, It's a really large island. I think most people are surprised. I mean, it takes 12 hours to drive across it. Um, and again, like I said, the next point to land is England. Now we're only a 4.5 hour flight to England. So theoretically, I mean, people from when we've gone over there for the weekend, right? Which is kind of weird. People don't often think of it. People
No
often think
kidding.
we're really far north. And we're not. We've got a lot of, boreal forest, a lot of subarctic terrain, but, our winters here are fairly mild, right? Like we don't get like hard frost in the ground anymore. And so, yeah, that's us, a little island out in the.
I'm just in the process of reviewing the footage from the episode of WildFed we made when we visited you, and it's just such a beautiful, kind of a stark environment, but very, very beautiful. I really enjoy the place. Now, I'm curious about how you guys have been impacted by COVID-19 because you're, again, being an island, I kind of imagined you guys sort of isolated, and I was looking at Canadian maps early in. I've kind of gotten bored with watching the spread of this thing, but I was
Yeah.
initially watching both, US CDC's maps and then the maps for Canada. And you guys were, as you would expect, pretty isolated for a time, right? What's actually happened there? And being a place, there's a sort of sense, I guess in St. John's downtown feels very modern, but a lot of the island, you have this sense of a time kind of forgotten, a little bit sense of the past is much more alive there. So I'm
Yeah.
trying to imagine how culturally you guys are being impacted and what it might look like there.
Sure. So yeah, I mean, I live in St. John, so it's a regular city, 120,000 people kind of thing. And we were last to get cases in
A lot
Canada.
of people call that a town.
A town, okay. It's a big old city in
Yeah,
Newfoundland.
the big city.
Um, yeah, but yeah, we were last to get cases in Canada. The spread was really slow, and it stayed really slow. Early on, we had a few spikes, all led to one cluster case, what they were calling. And then really, like, we haven't had a case now in 6 days. And our cases only got up to just over 250.
Oh,
So we're
nice. Okay,
really
wow.
lucky. Yeah. And like you said, a lot of that do have to do with the remoteness of Newfoundland. When you get, I mean, there's basically one road, the Trans-Canada Highway, that goes across the middle of the island. 90% of the island is completely inhabited. There are still lots of little, small towns that are only accessible by boat. Lots of the islands around Newfoundland are still inhabited, ferries coming back and forth. So it's a lot of rural, and so certainly that often helps with, that the spread of that kind of stuff. We don't have, big high rises, or when we got apartment buildings and that kind of stuff here. But once you get out of the city, or even inside the city, like, you're really, you have your own house and your own piece of land, and so life really hasn't changed much for me.
Right.
I mean, yes, we're all doing the social distancing and stuff, but it's a lot easier to do it here because there's just a lot less people. And when you get in little tiny towns, a couple of hundred people, it's there's just so much space here. You can't really feel like locked down here, unless, of course, right inside the city you feel a little bit, but
Are the businesses shut down and
yeah.
Okay.
Oh yeah, all non-essential businesses are shut down. The restaurants can only do takeout and that kind of stuff. But again, for lots of small towns, nothing has changed because there's there's a small general store in the town. Those are always kept open because they're essential, and so for a lot of people, not very much has changed.
Yeah, right.
In your day-to-day life,
And I was thinking about, I'll come back. I want to circle back to how, and to talk a little bit about how you don't have to necessarily be living a preparedness lifestyle to be prepared, because a lot of the things that we do just really set us up well for this. But I want to go back in time a little bit to last winter, because you guys it was last winter, right? Where you had the storms that really locked you guys up for a while.
Oh yeah, the Snowmageddon they were calling it. So it was
Snowmageddon. You sent me a photo of a house up to its eaves in snow. I mean, it looked like you would have had to, carve a tunnel from the door.
You
up
did.
and out.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yes, people did. Yeah. And St. John's got hit the hardest, which is usually not like that.
Okay, so that's really interesting to me too, because I'm somebody who just likes to live in such a way that if something like that happens, you're not panicking because you're well set up for it. And so, yeah, I just find that part interesting because it could be a pandemic, it could be Snowmageddon, it could be 100 other things too, that some of which have happened before, some things that might be novel. So I just find this part interesting because during that time, I remember texting with you and you saying sort of like, yeah, we're kind of all set up for this and we're getting a lot of projects done in it. I imagine there's sort of a similarity to what's happening right now.
It is actually, yeah. I mean, the grocery stores, I'm not going into grocery stores now, say for instance. So it takes a week by the time you order your groceries and you do curbside pickup. But if I run out of bread, it doesn't really matter to me. If I want a luxury item like ricotta cheese, I'm going to make it out of milk. So lots of people here are definitely, I mean, we ran out of yeast and flour, which is one of the biggest things because we, so many people here know how to make bread. And so you're making bread for the neighbor but staples like that. Yeah. I mean, when Snowmageddon came, we were shut down for a week. The grocery stores were open, but for really, I think 48 hours, like nothing was open. Literally cars could not move on the streets. And I mean, food wise, we're fine, right? It's like you said, we're so set up for it with preserving and bottling and the amount of, wild game and stuff we keep on hand. And I'm sure it's very different than most people live, but we're not most people, I don't think.
Yeah, no, yeah. Newfoundlanders are not most people, that's for sure. Well, that's what I was saying before. Is I feel this connection to the past there, and particularly, I guess through knowing you, that connection to food is a big part of it. It's like how you connect to that place. So, could you kind of give us a little bit of backstory on you and your connection to, how do I put it? Your connection to that place and how it's come through food and sort of the connections and the stories that you've been collecting and things like that over the years, because I feel like there's somehow this thing of how we lived not that long ago in the past seems like it offers a lot of solutions and answers for what we need going forward.
Yes. It is kind of interesting. There's lots of places in Newfoundland where time almost stood still, right? In terms of, say my mother's time, I'm 70 now. And there's lots of places that still live so close to the land like that. When it comes to, like I said, the living seasonally on the land as wild game comes, or even as far as reared animals and reared vegetables, like in certainly Nan's time, Nan's 92 now, they were almost completely self-sufficient. And so I just found it, I mean, like you just find it so interesting how far we've come. And
in 2 generations.
Right. And I don't necessarily look at it in a look how far we've come in a good way, right?
Yeah, right.
Because I think it's clear right now that it's not always a good way, right? In so many larger ways, but in terms of our food and food supply, I mean, like we mentioned, like we're in a place where nothing grows for 8 months of the year. So people here, they knew what to do. They knew how to prepare and how to store food and how to, get to that, what they used to call the hungry month of March, right? And that was the time when, your pantry staples were dwindling. So again, you have to think back. Still there's very little to no public transportation to get you across the island. So back then there was no roads to get you across the island. There was, there was one railway that went across. So it's not like you could easily access things, right? So you grew all your own vegetables. They were all stored up for the winter. Fresh meat in Nan's time was only game and stuff, and still be a pig slaughtered once a year. And I don't know, I just find it so fascinating that we've come so far away from it. Now there's lots of people that still very much live in a certain way. They can still live like that, and but it's that skills and knowledge that is trapped still. And for me, it became really important to. And it's, so interesting now, especially all of a sudden I get this, new interest in going back. And I just took out all these binders and stories and stuff this morning and started going back through them, and just, I don't know, just fascinating stuff with the stories of people, and how they made out, how they knew what to do. And they knew it by, watching the animals. Even there's a story there, a guy tells about how so much what we can learn comes from animals, and how animals were stored up for the winter. And, the rabbits that you hunted in the fall of the year were the best rabbits because they had the fat stored up. I mean, you look at deer hunting and that kind of stuff too, right? The fall bear is the one that got all the fat. And anyway, It's so interesting.
So you just mentioned breaking out your binders. So I want to kind of get people connected into what you're talking about. You've been working on a project for some time now. Is this is the Livier's Cultural Alliance that we're talking about? These stories that you've collected.
Yeah.
So kind of give us some background on that.
Yeah. I mean, when I started, I guess, when I started the business and stuff, I really, I'm 43 years old now. There was, I wanted to have rich stories to share with people about this time, and a place and a food source. And the only way to get it was to start talking to the old people here. So I did, and I started talking to them when I realized that, well, first of all, how much they love to sit and talk to you about it. They talk about the simple times. I mean, just for everybody's mental health, like to sort of walk back in time with people that you talk to about food. It is such a human connection, and it's there
must be so much joy in the storytelling.
Oh my God, right? Anyway, and I just felt it was really important to start having these stories, and not only by word of mouth, but by having them written down. So I did. I started asking people, I started interviewing people, as simple as recording on my phone or whatever, and sitting down and having cups of tea with people all over the island. Every time I'd go somewhere, I'd reach out and say, I'm coming to, Bonavista or whatever. Does anybody know anyone there who would sit and talk about, the old times and food and food ways? And there's always people. It's like, I don't, when you get invited into Newfoundland for a cup of tea, it's because they're willing to sit and talk with you, and they're interested in what you have to say. So it's a very special thing. It's a very, as much as you think about tea is a real, ritual in places all over the world, it certainly is here too. And so it's like a big honor to be invited in for tea. And so I collected stories, and people wrote down stories for me, and I have all these binders and stories and recipes and just stuff that I've never even heard of. And even beyond that, like this one particular couple of binders I have, the guy goes on to talk about folklore and how important it was to read the weather. And so he has all these things written out. It's just truly lost in time, like how important it was for fishermen to learn how to read the weather, and they read it by the sky. And like, if the goats came down, literally, he says, if the goats came down from the hills, then you knew that the rain was coming. And I mean, how much of it was lore and how much of it was the case, who knows? But it's not the point. The point is in the story, right?
That stuff's hard to pick up later on, and I think as somebody who really started to immerse myself in wild food culture pretty late in life, my head is just I have too much going on inside my head every day because I'm, a 41-year-old man with a life to manage and businesses to manage and projects to do. And so I don't have always the mental space to notice all of those little details. But if somebody tells me, then I can really start to work from there. But a lot of that knowledge, it's not like you just go out in a generation and regain all that knowledge. So much of it, as it slips away, it's like the idea of documenting it, I think, is so important, especially because also when you're talking about somebody who's 80 years old, so let's say they're born in 1940, it's hard for me to really conceive the changes that they've seen take place because,
oh my God.
I mean, I remember the invention of mobile phones and then, the increase in telecommunications to the point that we are now. But that must be, I mean, the idea of somebody twice my age, what they've seen change, it's just really, really like hard to comprehend. So they're literally living in like literally a very different world today than the one they were born into. Whereas I feel like there's been, for us in our generation, there's been a kind of an obvious movement. It was already headed towards like a techno dystopia when we were born, but for them, not as much, right?
No, like my grandfather is truly stuck in time, and he loves it there. So, and lots of this stuff or stories you hear, or techniques and stuff that you collect, it likely will never have a use again, which is, I find interesting too. And then they'll always find stuff that you will have a use for, like especially preservation techniques, which one of my most fascinating. I just really love to dive into that with people, and most of it was not highly documented. So when you start to dig into it, you really have to ask questions, because they'll say something as simple as, "Oh, you just sprinkle it with salt," but no, it wasn't. It was the taking it in every night, and how it had to be laid out on the beach, and what kind of winds you needed to have it like that. But most of that would never be useful anymore. But I still think that it has a purpose to be documented, and to have its place in culture and in history.
If you had asked me a year ago, I would have said, yeah, it'll never really be useful again. Although there's that part of my mind that obviously doesn't really believe that, or else I wouldn't put so much energy into a lot of the things that I do. But but there's no obvious path to it becoming useful again, I would say. And then something happens like what's happening right now. And we're able to look at this and say, okay, this isn't as bad. Initially it wasn't very clear. How contagious is it? How deadly is it? How pervasive is it, et cetera. So we didn't know. And there was a moment of like, how bad could it get? And I think what's happened is it's revealed a tremendous amount of weaknesses in our systems, and particularly like the globalization of the food supply. And now we're seeing, big pork processing plants going down in Canada and the US, and starting to see that we're going to have a contraction in our food supply potentially, with increased prices. Now, this is not as nearly as serious an event as could happen. So I think there's like this little blip in our history right now where we're like, oh, maybe we don't want to just throw all that information out. Like, at least let's put it somewhere so that we can access it if we ever need it.
Yeah, we probably never thought that it was important, 100 years ago, to save the seeds either. But you look at this,
right.
The storage of seeds up in the north now, and the fact that the north is melting, and these seeds are, these massive seed banks around the world now. All of a sudden, it seems awfully a lot more important now that we hold on to stuff like that,
Yeah, and I've been thinking a lot about this last month or two about how much money. I'm pretty resistant to modern living, and still, even though I'm not fully bought into it. Like, for instance, I'm not in the stock market. I'm not like fully bought into how our economic system works, really. So even then, when I look at how much money I spend on insurance in a year, particularly if you include in what I spend in my business on insurance, all that money, which just goes into a black hole.
That's
I very rarely ever need it. And I know that it's more complex and nuanced than that. But for me, it seems like it's just money that goes away. So you start thinking about putting things up or storing things. And you could say to yourself, like, well, what's the point? I'll probably never use it. And it's like, well, yeah, but look at how much money you're willing to spend on insurance that you'll probably never use. And
right.
right. So it's like, it's not about that. It's about if you ever do need it. So it seems like, yeah, I just feel I'm very conservative when it comes to how we look at the human technologies that brought us to where we are today. It's like everything from, being able to nap an arrowhead to being able to can moose meat. It just seems like you want people remembering and keeping those traditions alive just in case, because it's like an insurance policy, I guess. I don't know if that makes sense to you.
Yeah, no, and I think money is a fascinating thing, and I realized it when I first started interviewing Nan, and I was asking Nan about growing up in the times. And everything, contrary to this belief that, the old days were these times of poverty, right? And especially here in Newfoundland, when people talk about that time, the story is, oh, we were so hard off, and it was, I don't know if I fully agree with it, but because I think when I interviewed, like I said, Nan's generation, there was full and plenty. And Nan talked about, everything was full all the time. The garden was full. The cellar was full. There was more meat and rabbits and turs and seal. And they were full all the time. And then when I started talking to Mom about it, Mom's time was a harder time here. And then it was the realization that, well, that's when money came. Right. So in Nan's time, everything was done on barter. So there was really no money. Like when sealing came here, pretty sure I mentioned this to you. When sealing came, it was one of the first opportunities that people actually got to go out on the ice and actually make money. So, that's what, Mom's time was harder time because people went to work, and you went to work and made very little money, but it meant that there was a whole lot less time for what used to be a full day of planning around food, right? So Nan talked about getting up at 9 years old. Her job was to make all the bread for the family. Every day she'd get up and make the bread because her mother at 4:00 in the morning was gone down making fish. So the women would leave their homes and go down and help the men as they brought the fish in. And then, so Nan at 9 had to make the bread. And then, and then it was this whole day that was filled with, preparing for the 8 months that was coming. And in Mom's time, it wasn't like that because Pop went to work and Nan went, what they used to call, went into service. So out around the little communities, because there was wealth and money here in the city of St. John's, women out around the communities would, get on a bus and they would come into the big city and they would go into service. So they would become maids for the wealthy. So they would go in and look after their children and do all their cooking and stuff. But the monetary value of that was so little that the cost of foregoing all the work that was put into food, it was dramatic. Mm-hmm. And in just that one generation, it went from full and plenty to hunger. That was huge for me. When I don't know, the more I thought about that, the more I was like, wow.
I want to say something real quick, just so for the listener to get clarified on my personal position. And so I'm not speaking for you or anybody else, but if you force me to look at like two options, like, do I want to be a capitalist or a communist? I'm going to go capitalist. That said, so just to get that out of the way for people, because here, when I talk negatively about our financial system, I don't want people to think, oh, then he must be a socialist or something. I'm definitely not.
Don't worry, you'll get a few comments.
No matter what I say, it won't matter, right? Everything's so polarized. Right. And as you've pointed out to me, I tend to be a bit too apologetic maybe, but the challenge, I think, is like once you step onto that financial treadmill, it's not like it's very difficult to step back off. So if you're living a subsistence life and then you start to get into the economic system, and as you just mentioned, because I think that's what brought it up for me, that amount of time, those 8 to 10 hours that they were trading off were crucial for the subsistence life that they were living. Yes. So now it's like very difficult to get back, but you're doing it for a really small amount of money. But once you start to take on whether it's debts or bills, or you start to buy
Yeah.
commercially manufactured goods and all of that, once you get on that treadmill, man, you're stuck there. And that's why I think a lot of people feel that this system is such a trap, because it, and the other thing is it's not easy for people who are living in the modern lifestyle now, who, let's say they get on your Instagram page and they go, I want to start doing what Lori does. It's like a luxury to find the space and time to get to do these non-monetary activities, because people are so busy trying to keep up on the treadmill. So I think it's like,
Well, yeah, it's a
but
luxury to, yeah, it's a luxury to hunt now. And,
yeah,
when I
that's
say
it.
to people that my freezers are full of game birds and, squid and fish and, in modern day, that's a luxury now because
Mhm.
because people don't have the time to do it.
Right.
Right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I feel like that part of me that's more on the capitalist side says, well, like everybody has, we don't have equal outcome, but we definitely have a better than ever an equal opportunity. I mean, I know it's not perfect, but most, you really have an opportunity to create the life that you want. And, I think for the most part, most of us do. And so you and I get to do that because we've intentionally cultivated a lifestyle where that could happen. But I understand for a lot of people who hear, like you just said, or hear me talking about my freezers and they're like, well, must be nice. It's
Yeah.
like, yeah, well, I did a lot of work to get to where I could do that too. But
Right. What my mom will say when she calls, she'll torment me when she's saying, "What are you doing? I suppose you're sitting around with your feet up, are you?" Now, knowing full well that I'm probably not sitting around with my feet up.
right.
But you're right. Like, this is a choice that I make to put this much time into how I choose to eat, and I get it. I'm in an economic situation where I can do that, but it's also a large part of choice, right?
Hmm.
I do choose to put this much work into my food. I don't have to. I can go out and buy, pasta and gnocchi, or I could just not eat like that. But if I
Hmm.
want to have, it's a cost and time and value system that I think has brought us to eat the way we eat and live the way we live. It's just
Hmm.
a matter of what's more important. I don't want to go to the gym for an hour. I'd rather stay home and make singing nettle gnocchi for supper and homemade ricotta cheese, right? And while that sounds like a huge
Yeah.
luxury, I guess it is, right? If we to really be honest, but this conversation is interesting, in particular because right now, with the amount of people around the world, and to bring it right back to here, who are not going to have jobs to go back to.
Hmm.
So we take our very modern day living of our paying for haircuts and paying for every single, you know, the amount of luxury money that most people have, and whether you see it as that or not, it likely is, to be able to do all these things, additional extra expenses that we have, people are not going to have it. Like, people already are living on less than 50% of their income, or, worse, right?
Yeah. Worse. Worse. A
And
lot of people.
here in Canada, they have, I don't know what's exactly happening down there, but there's emergency fund set up, right? So as is in this emergency fund, if you have lost your job due to COVID, there's all these stipulations. A lot of people are able to avail of it. So if you're employed and you lost your job, you're entitled to, I think it's $2,000 a month right now.
Wow.
That could be more than you were making before, mind you. But there's that's not going to go on forever. It reminds me of the cod fishery when the fishery closed and there was this big platform laid out of financial assistance. It runs out, right?
Yeah.
And it's fine while you're on it and here now. But what are all these people going to do in a place where we're so dependent on so many industries? Tourism brings in $1.9 billion a year. The oil industry, we're so dependent on people here who work offshore, and so many of those oil workers coming in, and now the oil industry is tanked. It will be interesting to see where, and I hate to think this, but I think in 6 months it will be worse. When you think about the fields in Ontario now that are being left go because they can't bring in migrant workers to plant the seeds, the same kind of situations are happening down the States in Florida. Like, all of our fruit comes from those places, right?
Hmm. Well, you've seen the milk trucks just pouring milk out, onto the ground, or now they're saying, with the hog plants down, they'll probably end up just euthanizing and burying most of these hogs because they can't get them to a USDA certified,
Right.
processing plant. So a lot of food is just going to, and then obviously all these restaurants, which were tremendous consumers
Yeah.
of produce, of food that's perishable. And suddenly overnight, they stop, buying all that food. So there's just, it's so hard to think about, but all that food
Isn't
going to
it?
waste. And as you said, the scariest thing being whether or not people are able to actually next year's crops, what I'm worried about. Like one of my biggest
Yeah.
pieces of advice to people right now, because I don't know if you're noticing this, but a lot of people seem to think this is just about to wind up and then it's going to be over. And it's like, are you kidding?
I agree. Yeah.
It's like an
Just
earthquake, and there's an earthquake and you're in the house, in the basement, and the whole thing's shaking. And then finally it stops. And yeah, the earthquake's over, but now you have to go outside and assess the damages, right?
the trickle down effect of this for
Yeah.
months and years.
Right. Years.
Will be
Yeah.
felt.
And we have about 500. I just saw yesterday we have about in the States, 560, I think it was 562 people who have lost their job to every one person who's died of COVID so far. And that's not me. I'm not taking that position of the economy is more important than lives. And I'm not taking the position that lives are, I think both of these arguments have merit.
Yeah.
But it seems like we were pretty hasty to shut everything down. And now we got to see what the recovery is going to look like. And also, we have those kind of bailouts you were talking about too. That money doesn't just come out of nowhere. I think every American just shouldered $16,000 in debt to produce this $2 trillion bailout that we've just done.
Right.
Most of which has gone to a lot of big companies, not a lot of which has gone to people. But anyway, so yeah, this is our children's debt. Basically, we're borrowing off the kids' future now to do
Yeah.
this. So yeah, we don't know what it's going to look like, right? It's like, make sure you have food to get through your winter. You will, and I will, but I'm worried about a lot of people who are going to get out of this thing, not have a lot of money on hand, maybe be so excited to go back to the movies and to go buy some new clothes and get a haircut and not think about, hey, maybe food's going to be a little tighter and a little more expensive this coming winter. And I'm thinking about making sure we're good till spring of 2021. So I'm using this summer to really prepare for that, just in case. Because again, maybe it's nothing, but maybe it becomes important.
Well, I don't know how on the tips of everyone's tongue food security is in other places, but in Newfoundland, it is pretty on the tips of everyone's tongue. It's out, and it has been for a long time. And we only needed to have something like a shutdown over Snowmageddon to see what happens to food here. We only need to have 2 days of heavy wind to see what happens to the food here in the grocery stores.
Because of the shipping?
Because the shipping. So everything is shipped in, and once the high winds come and the ship's shut down for 2 days, you got 48 hours of nothing coming in and out. So the grocery store is completely empty of all fresh vegetables. Wow. Inside 48 hours, there's 40 feet of length where there is not a vegetable to be seen. Now, yes, there's, we won't starve because, we have things like the army will come in, but it's a weird to every single person, from the person who buys, avocados and pomegranates at $2.99 each, to the person who waits every month to get their old age pension to go and buy their groceries for the month. So, right. So I used to sit on the Food Policy Council here, and these are the conversations that have been coming up for a long time now. And I wonder, here inside, it's been 3-4 weeks now. There's a task force here, and the conversation, the committee, of course I got myself on.
Are you?
Well, I was asked to sit in on it, so I did because it's too interesting not to. So the task force is putting together the things like personal protective equipment. We are now working towards getting food security to the level of urgency as that. Good. And so this is what this team is working on. We're talking about, starting getting home backyard growing kits for people into the most vulnerable people who need them. We're talking about, there's already a seed shortage here. Immediately people here have gone to, you can't buy a chicken right now. You can't buy local eggs right now. People have gone very quickly back to that. And I think it's because we're so close to it still. right?
Mm-hmm.
When mom talks about stuff and Nan talks about stuff now, I'm thinking, and 3 weeks ago, I'm thinking, okay, what am I going to need to be thinking about next month and the month away? And when
Right.
you talk
Right.
to the old generation, first thing they talk about is food.
Mm-hmm.
And now the
Yeah.
young people that, the new hipsters are going, oh, wait a minute, I can't go to my farmer's market anymore. I can't, and now,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it's hit everybody's reality. And I guess it certainly has something to do with, being this island in the middle of the North Atlantic and, and being very dependent on one, the shipping system, but also just aware of food. And the story of food here is so rich that we still,
Yeah.
we all still remember.
You guys also, because you experienced such a really catastrophic, I think catastrophic's not too big of a word, really. You guys experienced a catastrophic fishery collapse in the cod
Mm.
fishery. Do you think that, and I know that a lot of that was for export, but do you think having that, a culture built around a food source, essentially, right? Because that fair to say
Yeah.
Newfoundland was sort of built
Yeah.
around the cod
Oh,
fishery.
yeah.
So when that collapsed, that must leave a lasting memory of how a food can be abundant and then suddenly basically go away.
Right. And this is not just like a small thing, right? So when the fishery collapsed, as we've talked about before, there was no one that it didn't affect, because everybody, if you weren't a fisherman, you knew someone who was. There's the plant workers, there's the truck drivers, there was so many people that made that go round, and every second neighbor, was a fisherman or someone who worked. So it wasn't stifled by, socioeconomic status. Everyone
Mhm.
knew they were, at the heads of government. It was on the news all day. So it was so big. So it absolutely makes sense that, that, plays a role in it today, because when,
Mhm.
like, now we have what they call a recreational food fishery. Totally disagree with the term, but where, as someone who lives here, we can, all summer long during the cod fishery, we can go out and catch 5 fish a day per family. And it was called food fishery in the beginning. And so we can still do that as residents, people who live here. And that is, yes, considered a food fishery. Here's an interesting thing. I have to bring this up to you. So I went into the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, which is where I have to renew my firearms license for the fall hunt. And
You
when
have
I
to have a
went in there,
license for a firearm?
yeah.
Slaves.
You have to, okay, so here's the thing. I don't have to register my you can register your guns or you cannot. Um, but if you're in the woods with a gun and do not have a license to carry a firearm, you're in big trouble.
Got it. Okay.
So you have to have a license to carry, because gun licenses are restricted. Like, there's a restricted gun license. If I want to carry a handgun, I have to get a restricted firearms license. And if I'm
Understood.
transporting that firearm from place to place, I have to have a transport license. So we can't just go.
My wife after moving here has just, it took like a year and a half, 2 years for her to finally get that. And like, I don't have to have any, like, because in
Yeah.
Maine, if I want to conceal a handgun, I can just conceal a handgun. As long as I'm not a felon and I'm over 21, then I can just
I
carry a
heard
handgun.
somebody say, like, when there
What's
was a
that?
bank, I heard somebody tell me a story not too long ago. There was a bank in the States that was like, if you open an account here, we'll give you a handgun. I was like, what?
Yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. We're very friendly to it. I mean, it's hotly contested, but of course it's built into our constitution. But yeah, it took a long time for her to, because she's just so used to that being part of the culture in Canada, that she'd be like, so there's just like, no one knows that you have that, or like nobody, there's not a list somewhere. Like, it's like, nope, we don't. But anyway, so carrying on.
But like, outside of Canada, people don't really have guns, are law-abiding citizens, say, right? So in Newfoundland, guns are either kept in your house because it's an heirloom or because you hunt with it. We don't have guns for protection. Like,
Mhm.
I can't even say that
Not
without talking.
not an AR-15 culture.
No. So anyway, when I went to renew my license, there was a box at the end of it. The license is $85. I think it lasts for 5 years or something. At the end of it, it said, if I'm a subsistence hunter, then the fee can be waived. However, this will involve more questioning, and your license could be, delayed. So I thought to myself, well, of course I'm a subsistence hunter. How can I not be? Like, what else am I killing a moose for? What am I getting 1,800 pounds of meat for if I'm not?
Those horns.
Right? Which is not a culture here. So yes, Americans come in and like Europeans come in, Americans, they come in and hunt here. Big game outfitting is a big thing here.
As sport.
As sport, yeah. But they usually leave the meat with the outfitters anyway. So they don't often carry the meat home. They come for a trophy hunt. But Newfoundlanders, that don't exist here. So to me, if you get it's not to me. If you get a license to kill moose, you're a subsistence hunter. So I can't wait for them to call me. I can't wait for someone who sits behind a desk to tell me that I'm not a subsistence hunter.
Right. Oh, that's funny. Do you think that you guys are going to see a renewed? When I was there, the capelin were running. So for folks listening, it's a small saltwater marine smelt, basically. Probably about a 6-inch long, 6-8-inch long fish. Yeah. And when they spawn, as I recall, they would be sort of in the breakers, rolling up on the beach, depositing their eggs and milk.
Yeah, millions of them.
Yeah, like lots of them. And so we saw folks down there dip netting, which was a traditional activity there. So I'm curious about, okay, so there's the capelin. I'm going to add a couple more here and then I'll circle back. You guys have your cloudberries. That's what they're called, right? The small ground raspberry. Bake apples. Okay. But cloudberry is the same fruit, right?
Yes.
Okay, cool. So that looks like looks like a small raspberry that's kind of peachy colored. Grows low on the ground, and you got all these like traditional foods there. I'm sure we could go on and on, but do you think that this year there will be? So last year I saw people out there dip netting. People know about it, but I'm sure participation has waned, both due to the loss of the larger populations of capelin, but also just because people are more industrialized and such. Do you think there'll be like a renewed vigor around things like that this year as a result of what's happened? Or do you think more people will be out there dip netting, more people will be harvesting berries, more people will be hunting than in years past? Maybe not even because of direct food shortages, but because of it's been such a reminder about food security. Hey, we'll get right back to the show in a moment, but first I wanted to tell you about Paleo Valley's 100% grass-fed beef sticks. I recently received a package in the mail with all of their flavors. And by the way, I like them all pretty equally, but I'm partial to the original flavor. Anyway, they were interested in sponsoring the show, and I wanted to test out their products first. Now, I already knew the benefits of grass-fed, grass-finished meats with their substantially higher content of omega-3 fatty acids, conjugated linoleic acid, and glutathione, but I hadn't had many meat snacks that I really liked. Well, I still haven't. And that's because my wife likes them so much that she's got to most of them before I could. Seriously though, these meat sticks are awesome and perfect for your backpack, when you're traveling, or just need a high-protein, low-carb snack. If you're doing a paleo, keto, or carnivore diet, or just want a quality meat source on the go, visit paleovalley.com/wildfed. Again, paleovalley.com/wildfed. That'll get you 15% off your order, in addition to the bulk discounts they offer right there on the site. Again, go to paleovalley.com/wildfed and your 15% off will automatically be applied at checkout. Again, paleovalley.com/wildfed. There are several flavors to choose from, and they're all excellent. These are not like the spam-tasting meat sticks from that highly processed brand at the health food store. You know who I'm talking about. These taste more like a summer sausage made love to a Slim Jim. And as I mentioned, they're Avani approved. Trust me, she's picky. Again, go to paleovalley.com/wildfed and get 15% off your order. Now, back to the show.
So as for, people from here still collecting berries and still collecting capelin and stuff, you might see, like mom's generation in that, take a little bit of a more earnest in that now. Like mom is already saying, well, I can't believe I don't have more bottled moose, or, and because it boils her to have to go to the supermarket and buy meat. Like it eats her soul. Right? And dad's the same way. So, dad won't even eat meat from the supermarket. And that's that's because he was a fisherman. He grew up and they didn't eat much meat. But I don't know. It will be very interesting to see. Like I said, the biggest thing here is fresh vegetables and fresh fruit. So I think you will see people. There is already, like I said, people are running out of seeds already here. The seed companies, they can't even get their orders in from wherever they're coming from in Canada. I was just told this morning by one of the ladies that sits on this task force that she's in hydroponics, and she says, I have to go to the States now to get seeds. So
Wow.
So people are definitely thinking about it. You can't, like I said, you can't even buy chickens here now, or because people are immediately going to, I need chickens in my backyard for eggs. Like, it's happening really fast. So it'll be interesting to see. I bet you will see, like I said, mom's generation more so, taking a real keen interest in making sure there's a little bit extra stuff, I think.
I wonder about too, people who lead wild food walks courses. You do a lot of education there to your community. So I'm imagining, my guess would be you'll see an increase in that kind of business, because I think, and my hope is that this subsides and life returns to whatever sort of normal it can. And then my hope is that there's a renewed passion for all things, not just wild food, but I think, any kind of sustainable food, whether that's, permaculture, gardening, like whatever, that kind of stuff, all of it, but rearing your own animals, all that kind of stuff. But I think that we're going to see an uptick in it. I just think there's going to be a renewed interest because you've going to have a generation of kids who grow up with this memory. So sort of like folks lived through the Depression, have a hard time throwing things away. I think it's going to be a bit like that. I know that, my wife, Ivani, this is wild food's not her passion, although she's certainly really enjoyed doing these things with me. But, I didn't meet her at like a wild food course or something like that. That's not what she grew up doing, and it's not really her adult passion. But boy, she developed a much keener interest in it. And I've really watched her have a lot of experiences of going like, oh, wow, I really get why we do this. Or like, oh, I really am glad we do that, or all those kind of things. So I'm seeing that, in my own house.
Isn't that the whole idea? Isn't that what people like you and I work for?
Yeah.
In a certain sense, right? We do this out of a true love of, just the process of doing it. But that's not only why we do it, because we, TV shows, you make podcasts, I take people out on walks, I do, training seminars and stuff. And the reason that we do it is because we love it. But we want to share it with people.
Yeah.
And we want to share it with people with the hope and the interest that they pick up an interest in this. Because I think we are all hoping for a little change, and maybe even so, like even more now. The idea is that people are more conscious eaters, we're more conscious growers, regenerative farming, like all these things that, hydroponics, and all how it relates to our economy and our food systems. So I think we're all paying more attention to that stuff, and even before this. But I think you are right. Like, Ivani sees it in your house. My kids are now seeing it in my house. There's no more, my kids can go through fruit is expensive in Newfoundland, but they can go through $50 worth of fruit in 2 or 3 days. But there is, there is no fruit in my house right now, right? I'm gone back to buying canned fruit like we did when we grew up. And that's all what we grew up on outside of the berries. We really only had berries. So a strawberry was only a wild strawberry. It was all I ever knew until my adult life, when I was, when strawberries were brought in from California or wherever. And
you must have been like, why are people eating this?
What the hell?
Because I went the other way. I went the other direction. Like, I'd only ever had those giant nitrogen puffed, watery strawberries. And then when I had wild strawberries, I was like, oh, that's the whole point. Like, that's what they're supposed to taste like.
We won't even buy them. Mom won't even buy them. But it's that mentality. It's like, sure, what would you buy that for? Right? Now, everybody obviously is not like that. But the kids are so keenly aware now that we, are not eating the way that we used to eat. And now when they always love being in the kitchen with me and making stuff. But even more now, it's like, well, we don't have any cookies, so we don't have any muffins. It's like, well, that means you need to make muffins. Then you need to think about, and then, well, let's say, kids, what do you want to have for supper? oh, let's have duck. It's like, yeah, well, you need to think about that 3 days ago.
Ah,
Because
I love what you're saying right now because it teaches you a type of problem solving that's really lacking in
yeah,
our culture because we're in this immediate gratification phase of
yeah,
history. So the idea, like you said, if I want to eat tamales, okay, I got to take out a roast that's going to take 2 or 3 days to thaw out. Then I've
right,
gotta think about a whole day of cooking. Then I gotta
right.
think about staging out my ingredients. So it's kind of like learning to do a Rubik's Cube and building that part of your mind that has to think, or playing chess or something where you have to think several steps ahead. And,
Now I think
you know
like that anyway, but now it's becoming really aware that most people don't think like that.
Yeah. Yeah, well, or just, like, even, like, managing multiple pans on your stove, it's just like
Right.
it playing the drums or something,
Yes,
you gotta it's a
you're
lot of different limbs
you're
doing a lot of
rewiring your
different
brain.
things. Yeah. So I think that's because one of the things I'm wondering a lot about is how much of what we were doing before, how much culturally we're gonna look at and go like, "Oh, well, I kinda liked it during quarantine in that sense." Like, I didn't
I
you
know.
know, every
Yeah.
the kind of things like, for instance, my hair and beard right now, so, like, bushy and grown out. I would've gone and got them cut 2, 3, 4 times by now. And
Yeah.
it's like, okay, wow, it's kinda nice to not go do that, not go spend that money and not have to go do that drive and blah, 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 and all those kind of things, like, all of
Yeah.
the restaurant expenses, which are just enormous. We're trying to support our, friends in town and stuff, but, like, it's just nice not to have the obligations to have to go out and do so many different things. So, I do wonder at the end of this if people are I think it'll be hard not to just slip back right to where we were, but at least there'll be this memory of home cooked cookies or whatever, people remember that. Your kids are gonna
Yeah, but
remember that.
yeah, but mom and them still won't throw anything out. Dad, my father, I think he exclusively lives on leftovers because he won't see anything thrown out. But that is an ingrained um, life, and that life wasn't just for 6 months or 3 months. Like that
Mhm.
life was his whole life. So
Right,
I
right,
wonder
right.
how much of this will carry over.
Yeah,
I
I get you.
unfortunately think that people will very quickly slip back to,
Yeah, it'll be easy
um,
to.
yeah, yeah, because like you said,
I
it goes back to, the capitalistic culture and everyone's, we will go back to work. And if you get chickens now or start gardens now, you are going to realize how much work it is to do that stuff,
Yeah,
right? And then when you go back
right.
to work or you go back to this so-called normal life, um, yeah, you are not going to be able to keep that up
There's gonna
because,
be a
like,
lot of chickens available.
you've got a lot of chickens ago. They're going to be real cheap then, yeah. But
Well,
it
that's
is,
interesting too because you sort of harkens back to what we were talking about earlier, that it's hard to do a subsistence life and work a 9 to 5. And so for
yeah,
people like you and I who, and a lot of our colleagues who do this stuff, it's kind of, like it's like what you were just saying about that paperwork you were filling out. To us it's subsistence, but to the rest of the world it looks like a hobby because we don't
that's
really
right.
have to do it, right? So
Yes.
if it's like, I don't think of it as a hobby, but let's just say it is for a second, it's hard to do the subsistence thing and work because normally subsistence is something you do in the absence of the job and vice versa. So when you try to do them both, it's like you almost need twice as much time. And I
Yes.
do think though a couple of scarcities that stand out to me. I saw the funniest meme because I think COVID-19's had a strong meme game, very strong. I've seen a lot of funny stuff, but my favorite so far has been it was a photograph of a toilet paper roll sort of on the little dispenser there, and it's just sort of the brown tube, but there's little specks of still
Oh yeah,
white
there's
toilet paper on it. It said a lot of meat on those bones. A lot of meat, left on that bone. It's like, seeing that, it's really funny to me because I'll see like my wife will save like a little square, little like quarter square of toilet paper now, which we just didn't ever do that before. It didn't have to. It was so abundant. But I mean, we still don't have any on our shelves a month later. And so, I think some of that scarcity, even if it's a temporary thing, I think it's just good for people to, again, I don't mean this callously about people who are losing their lives, anything like that, of course.
no, no.
I'm just saying, like, for people who it's good for us to see some of this extreme wealth stripped away. And then I think also we all know that our lifestyle isn't really sustainable. So we know we have to change it at some point. So it's like,
Mm.
being forced to look at some of those changes, and maybe see that it's not all the worst. Because I think there's been so many people talking about the family time that they've had, or the reflective
Yeah.
time that they've had, or the books that they've got to read, all that stuff that a lot of us have been wanting to do for a long time. I think it's
I
kind
think
of nice.
people are already having, okay, maybe I should just speak for myself. I'm already having anxiety about things going back to this
Me
normal.
too. Me
I'm like,
too.
no, I just want to live in my bubble. No, it's really nice in here,
Mhm.
and I go to the cabin and it's complete isolation, but I went to the cabin before for isolation, so it's really nice.
I totally know what you mean. I'll see the
Yeah.
articles like, okay, well, looks like we're going to be starting to open up soon. It's like, no. And then
No.
I gotta say, this is really weird for me, but I love the wearing a mask thing, because I just love to be able to like hide myself like that. So I'm wearing like a neck gaiter pulled up over my face and a hat. So it's like a ninja look. And I'm like, I get to walk around. I look like I'm about to rob the store and I can just walk around like this. Like, okay.
This is
Uh,
great.
like I would do that all the time if it was socially acceptable, but I'd get arrested, So I'm like really milking that opportunity. I love not having to talk to anybody. I love that no one wants to park near me. It's just I'm really enjoying all of that. Yeah.
The introvert isolation human.
Yeah. Well, I mean,
I hear you.
it's kind of, I think a lot of us who like to spend time in the woods, we tend to like a little bit more alone time and a little bit more isolation. So, one interesting thing that's going on here, we're about to our turkey season. I know you don't really get to experience that up there. I feel bad for you, but anyway,
I
our,
can mail. You can always mail me some turkey.
I don't know if that's legal, but the turkey season opens next week, and they're opening it 2 days early, and
Mhm.
they are not requiring you to bring the bird in for a tag anymore, in Maine, which is really unusual. I mean, we treat turkeys like big game. You have to go to the tagging station. They put a tag on, blah, blah, blah. So they've just taken that away in an effort to get people out, which is really interesting. I think it's going to lead to huge amounts of poaching, which they must know and already have sort of factored for. It's kind of obvious. But they're actually, so
Right.
some places have restricted fishing and hunting, but Maine luckily is really opened it up. So they're allowing people to fish all of this month with no fishing license. They're allowing you to go out boating without a boat registration. And they're loosening hunting laws. So this is kind of we're going to really take advantage of all these opportunities.
Maybe
We
I
feel
could
really
drive
lucky.
down.
What's that? Maybe you can drive there. Is that what you said?
You could drive down and like hide out in the woods.
The turkey is so good. I cooked turkey last night, and it's just, man, it's incredible. Like I tend to do that. Like I'll get real stingy with the last of a meat until I'm really close to the season, and then I'll start opening up the store.
You're
So,
gorging.
yeah, now it's turkey time, and I know it's funny because I don't know the experience of the hungry month of March like your family remembers, but I get it metaphorically because
Yeah.
I know when my stores start to run low, which is right about now, and you start going like, man, my freezers don't feel so full anymore, and like I'm going to be really focused on. Anyway, I guess all of what I'm saying to come around to is say, I'm going to be foraging more intensely this year and hunting and fishing more diligently, and I'm going to be preserving more this year because I think it'll be nice to have that stuff coming up. I have a strong suspicion that it'll be a good time to have a stocked pantry, through this fall and winter.
Yeah. Yeah. And I don't think this won't be the last of this. I mean, this is waves of this have come through. I mean, historically, but also in our lifetime.
Yep.
And I think we all know now that it's likely that these kinds of things will continue to happen. If we're all just a little bit more prepared, if you can be, then I imagine people are going to pay heed to that. Yeah, I think you're really right on that.
They don't ever talk about the Spanish flu of 1918. It's 1918 and 1919. It's 2 years. And when you see the H1N1 numbers, because earlier, before this disease had led to a loss of life that exceeded H1N1, people kept bringing up those numbers. And I kept trying to point out they'd be like, well, it killed 11,000 people in the US, H1N1 did. And it's like, yeah, over 2 years.
Right.
These things don't go away in one season. They last 2 years. And when they're up there saying, there's the possibility, but maybe it won't rebound. Maybe there won't be a second wave. It's like, you guys know there will be. You're trying to keep people chill, and I understand that. But this is going to go on for a couple years, probably back and forth. We'll once you get out of, shutdown, people then get infected. I mean, of course, it's really obvious. So I do think like this one will stretch out longer than people maybe want to accept. And then, as you're mentioning, it's not like this is the only emerging infectious disease problem either. And then I think I'll add a third piece, which is that once government flexes a muscle like this, it's much easier to do it next time. And my concern is that, because we've seen already, here, I don't know how much of this stuff touched you guys up there, but it was like, we constantly have some virus that emerges. Usually they don't turn into much. So it'll be like, we had Zika, and we had the West Nile virus, and we hear about all these kind of things, and they certainly impact some people, but they don't usually seem to warrant all the media coverage that they get, which I think with this one, all of a sudden it felt like, we've heard this story before. It felt like crying wolf. And then this one actually turned into more than what we were used to. But I have a feeling now, when things start to emerge, the response is probably going to be bigger because we've already done it.
Right. Like, I think that will be one good thing that will come out of it. Is that, and I think the idea that this is going to go on for months or longer than we expected, again, like we were saying earlier, the things that people are only now starting to think about, and all the things that we are not yet even starting to think about, like, large food supply sources, large meat supply sources, like that stuff will be months and months and months. Like, it takes, the crops that it takes to grow to feed Canada and the United States. Like those large impacts, people are still trying to scramble to buy toilet paper and figure out how to homeschool.
Right.
We haven't felt those. We haven't felt what all this massive influx of money from, these bailouts are going to do to the economy and the stock markets. I can't wrap my head around it, to be honest, because I'm not someone who pays a lot of attention to, the stock markets and global business like that. My husband is. So when he's like shaking his head and he comes at it from reading the news, I'm like, no, don't tell me. No, I'm in my bubble. No. But, it's not, you can't be in your bubble because, I might like to pretend I am, but I can see down the road. I'm one of the people who are, just got, 9 chicken eggs delivered today so I can grow them out. Usually I get someone to rear chickens for me locally and slaughter them, in the fall of the year. And that's my chicken for the whole year because it's the only white meat that we eat. Because most of the game birds are all dark meat here, right? So chickens it's like a huge treat in the house. But I can't rely on, I feel now that I can't rely on other people, even when it comes to that. Because circumstances are going to change. Like, I've got this one guy that can just happen to rear chickens for me. But if something happens to him, or he decides now he's going to rear chickens only for his own family, then that changes my one full meat source for the whole year.
Right. Yep.
Right.
Yep. That's a big thing. Like this, as soon as this started, one of the very first things I did was contacted my local farmer, Brenna, and it just said, she's somebody who I've never been a member of her CSA. But I buy from her at the farmer's market. But right off, I was like, hey, I want to buy a share in this year's farm, because it's like, I want to secure my place in line, because I could imagine it getting to a point. Now, again, you have to war game a little bit, right? It's like, hopefully this doesn't happen, but you got to look at what could happen and then dial into where you think, it makes sense to invest. But it's like, in my mind, I was thinking, okay, well, first and foremost to her is her family. And she's got a big family, and that's who she's feeding first. Right. And then I am not her best friend. I'm like I'm a couple tiers out of her inner circle. So those people get food before I do. So I'm like, I'm getting in line now. I'm spending the money today because I don't want to be, I want that insurance that we'll have those supplies that we need. So
people like us are thinking ahead like that immediately to food source, probably just because of the nature of who we are and what we do. Yeah. But I immediately called my lamb farmer and was like, I just seen like literally that you had your lambs born. She's like, yeah. I'm like, are they all spoken for? She's like, no. It's like, I want 2. So I'm thinking of that immediately. Whereas I can usually call any number of farmers and get a lamb any time of the year. But it's also, and I don't know if I've thought about it that much actually until you were just talking about it with her and her family and her farm. Like you're also influxing money into keeping her going right now. So she's lost
That's
her
it.
farmer's market, right?
That's it.
And even here, people are, the idea of paying up front for stuff. I heard someone say that, whatever it was about their one of their food sources, they said, I called and paid up front for everything for the year too. So it keeps money going for them. Farmers right now here are they're talking about the feed supplies being a problem.
Right.
They're not actually, and these are really small farms. We don't have any large scale agriculture here, which is probably important to point out. So when I talk about the farmers, it's only small family farms really outside of milk production. Newfoundland, we consume all of our own milk and all of our own eggs on the island. And that's, of course, subsidized by the government in agriculture. But we don't have any large-scale farming like that here. So I'm talking about, Nan down the road who grows 8 pigs a year or something, or,
Right.
12. So it's very small scale. And like you said, if she can't get in her feed, she also said to me, like, we don't think we're going to be able to get any turkeys this year. And she usually, she'll usually bring in 50 turkeys a year, which is a lot for a small farm like that, right? So she's like, we can't even count on bringing in the turkeys because what if we can't get the feed, right? Mm-hmm. So it's, talk to those people, which I find really interesting. Like if you're living in your little bubble, like I say I am, just talk to other people. And I'm finding that really interesting to see what are you thinking about and what are you thinking about? Because I'm, food obsessed in my bubble, but what are other people thinking about? And here, when it comes to jobs in the economy, people are also starting to think ahead of, okay, so what is that job that's going to be basically like recession resistant right now? And what are people going to need? Yeah, like what are people going to need in 6 months when all those people are out of jobs and all these, there is a certain amount of resources that people are going to have, right? We are going to have to get our vehicles fixed. We have no transportation here. Everyone owns their own car. So stuff like that, we're always going to need, yes, grocery stores and that kind of stuff. But I think it's an interesting mindset when you talk to the farmer and then talk to the mechanic and talk to, whatever, and the hunters and just to see what everyone's mindset is right now. And it's just, to me, this is a phase to be massively gathering like information. Maybe that's the prepper in us.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and we both live in places where it's like, if I'm on a well, and so I don't think about the municipal water. And even if my well's dried up, I just walk out my back door and get water on my backyard. But a lot of people who are listening are living in an urban environment where they don't have that. Like they don't have water security. They don't have, I've also been thinking about, we have a lot of land here. And so it's like, we've had no problem. We don't feel cooped up. We have a lot of places just in what we own. We have a lot to play on, but then also, we have a lot of room around us, a lot of contiguous land to ours. And then we can drive around to go do whatever we want, basically in the woods. And Maine's encouraging that. But I can't imagine if I lived in a, 700 square foot apartment with a family and a dog and I couldn't really go anywhere. Right. I mean, be really, really hard. So, I do think, though, back to your point a moment ago, I think like that idea of trying to look at the crisis as an opportunity is the key. There's like you said about what projecting forward into what's going to be important, what jobs are going to be necessary, what goods do people need, what services are people going to need, and all that kind of stuff. Every time there's a big crisis, especially like an economic downturn or depression, it's not just a story of people losing. There's a lot of stories of people who win during that time.
Yeah, I went to my butcher the other day. Now, I don't live in his corner of town anymore, so I don't go there as much as I would. I used to go there daily for my everything, right? Now I go probably once a week. And he said to me the other day, I said, how's it going? How's business? And he said, business is up like 200%. He said, if we could even keep 10% of this business, he said, like, we'd be laughing. Like the local farmers right now
Yeah.
are
Slam.
absolutely, yeah, they're on slam. The people who are in hydroponics, the people who are in sprouts right now, and everyone's doing home delivery. I mean, I've
Mm-hmm.
got, fresh sprouts being delivered. We're growing our own sprouts. We got, hydroponic farms, the mushroom farms. There's two beautiful cultivated mushroom farms here now, all small scale. Those guys are on bust right now because
Mm-hmm.
you can put your order into the supermarket all you want, but you have no idea what you're getting. Some people are still going to the grocery stores, like especially people, obviously, if you're, low risk or like they've, dropped all the fee for delivering your groceries now. And so there's a lot of stuff set up that help you stay home. But again, we're like you, we have all this massive land, like 99% of Newfoundland is owned by the government or Newfoundlanders. So there's really no reason that you can't go out. And like you, I could go to the cabin. I have a pond. I have as much water as I need. I have a heat source because I can cut wood and have a wood stove, and I can feed myself.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I know that might sound survivalist and prepper-like, but it comes from thinking about people who are living on, who are so dependent in apartments and who don't have that kind of luxury. Or a lot of people in Newfoundland do.
Nobody says you're a prepper because you put fire extinguishers in your house. No one says you're a prepper when you put your seatbelt on. Nobody says you're a prepper because you buy car insurance but if you start to have some extra gasoline or you buy some precious metals or you store some food or whatever it is, people start acting like you're crazy.
Okay,
And
so that's
I
even
find
a word here. Prepper. I hear it everywhere, but here in Newfoundland, like everyone, once you leave the city, everyone's got 3 or 4 cans of gas in their garage. Everyone has a shed.
yeah,
Everyone's got
yeah.
extra gas. Everyone's got, yeah, like I have 75 bottles of moose. That's just a regular normal supply for me for the year.
Right. And let me that's a good point there too, because um we have this prepper culture here, and it kind of really kicked off at the same time that the whole like zombie apocalypse meme got big here too. And and so what you have is all these like internet ninjas who have bought all this equipment that they don't know how to use, and they have all this stuff but no skills, or no knowledge. And there's also a tendency to buy like a 15-year freeze dried food supply. It's like, dude,
That's
you
not
would be
here.
dead in a year eating that. That
Right.
is not food. It's disgusting. So what I don't
Men-
understand, like if you've got bottles of what's that?
Mentally, you couldn't survive eating that.
Yeah, mentally you won't survive it. Okay, so if you have something, what I say to people is like, put away what you use. Like if you like a certain bottle of olive oil, then just buy more of those. And if
Mhm.
you eat a certain grain, buy more of that. Don't buy the stuff that you don't eat. That doesn't make sense because that stuff's going to go to waste if you don't need it. But if you buy or produce or harvest things that you already use, and then you have lots of that, even if you never need it for an emergency, you'll use it anyway. And if you
Right.
do need it in an emergency, now you don't have this disruption where all of a sudden overnight your family's living off, Mountain House freeze dried foods. Like that just
Right.
seems so awful to me, or ramen noodles or something like that. So we don't store a bunch of stuff we don't use. And if you have extra gas on hand, you'll put it in your car or your chainsaw or whatever it is. Like you'll use it. So it seems to me that it just makes sense to have the whole point of a pantry is it's the stuff you use. And then what you realize pretty fast too is it's really convenient to not have to run out every 2 days to get more stuff because you just have it all and you can be
Right.
more productive anyway. So what kind of stuff are you really looking to put up this year? I'm kind of curious, like what your food projects are. Look, I guess looking into this growing season that's starting.
Yeah, well, we have a nice plot of land up at my mother-in-law's. So, and they seed it every year, and there's lots of vegetables come out of it every year. Lots of it don't even get used up because the land is just so fertile. It just produces so much we can't even eat it all.
Yeah.
This year, I will be paying way more attention to the stuff that's coming up in the garden. Um, for sure. And I'll be, freezing down every last bit of kale and everything that grows out of there. And I do that
Mhm.
stuff anyway, but I don't look ahead as in I want to make sure that I have this until next growing season. Like some
Yeah.
of that stuff is kind of like treats. So when you have, your family over, whatever, you go and pull out, the frozen kale or whatever. I'll definitely spend more. I mean, my business will be non-existent this year, so I'll have lots of time to go and forage a whole lot more, which will be really nice. Most of what I'm spending my time doing right now is just like massively consuming new information, because it feels like there was this stalemate for the past 3 or 4 years of discovery of new wild stuff, that, new plants and things that I could do stuff with.
New for you mean?
New for me, yeah, because I stalled at that, personal growth when it comes to that
Right.
kind of life, because life just got busy. So now I'm spending more time, consuming knowledge, which has been awesome and super inspiring, and more preservation ways. And I've got a lot of more meat preserved this year. And that happened, I started doing that even before this started to come. So, and it's those, the curing of the meat is something that you can't buy here. Like, you can't really buy good cured meats here. There's like one place, my couple of friends of mine own a great restaurant, and he's really the only place that is producing like salamis and really nice charcuterie. So I started doing my own, but now I'm going to really make sure I stock that up, because that's the special little things that you want. Like when on Friday evening, when I want to open a nice wine and have a nice piece of meat, and I want to always have it on the ready, there'll be more time to spend doing those kind of projects. So I'm really looking at more of the botanical side of stuff in terms of the medicinal side of stuff too right now. I just got a couple of bags of inoculated reishi mushrooms. So that's exciting.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, my brother works at a mushroom farm. And again, super small scale, but so that's been really exciting, diving into some medicinal properties of things. And yeah, lots of
This is a
more.
good time to build some medicines up too. I think,
Yeah.
in years past, that was a big thing for me for many years. Big thing for me was herbal medicine. And that's kind of how I really got deeper into the foraging side. And then because, picking up hunting and fishing was so all consuming for me, it's really the last few years of my life, well, I guess the last 5 years, have been so dedicated to that pursuit, learning it. But now I'm getting to that point where it's a little easier for me. I have a little bit more understanding. I can get it done a little faster. I'm better at butchering and all of that. So it's kind of opening up a little more space for me. And this is a year where I think putting up medicine is going to be really smart, particularly medicine that's good for, I think, for the symptoms of COVID, make a lot of sense. Things that are good for cough, things that are good for a dry cough, right? Things that are good for the immune system and all of that. Things that are, soothe the throat, like you said, all that stuff. So we're going to definitely be doing that. And Avani this year got her first hunting license, which is really cool.
Ooh.
So she's going to come out with me for turkeys, which is going to double up, hopefully doubles up what we put in the freezer. So yeah, I'm looking at calories in a big way this year, really just thinking about that. And then I think one of the things too about that prepping thing, and I was talking recently to Kevin about it, and Kosowin, who and he made the point that sometimes people say, well, somebody could just come take your stuff, and I was thinking like, yeah, they could, but like, more important to me is a little bit extra for the people who are in need too, because it's like, you put stuff away and for your family, but it's like, man, if you can put away a little extra just in case somebody else needs something too, that's so important. Or in case you want to barter it or trade it or whatever.
Yeah, exactly. So. We bought a bunch of seal this year for Seal Fest. And I've
so
got,
jealous when you talk about that.
So now I have, 70 pounds of seal meat in my freezer that we're not going to be able to use for Seal Fest. So that will go directly to the Native Friendship Center here. So that's the First Nations community here, because they actually, cool. Yeah, and so the people who go there are, they would love to get their hands on this. They're not hunting anymore. They're not able to hunt. There's a lot of elderly population there. And it's not accessible to everyone financially anymore, or just logistically, right? Mm-hmm. So yeah, it is always nice to have that. Like I sent my grandmother over some cod tongues. So over on Fogo Island, they do these gorgeous. The co-op over there does these gorgeous cod tongues, and they're all perfectly preserved and frozen and flash frozen at low temperatures. And I have like this little stash of them, and every now and then especially now since this came in, I'll send a few over to Nan, and the appreciation that they have for stuff like that, or I'll send my grandfather like a tur or whatever. And it's a walk back in time it's so emotional, and we're so still connected to food like that here. So, when someone gives me, whatever, I open the freezer and it's like a loaf of bread or, some mousse charcuterie or a bottle of mousse. Like that's still how we say thank you here, for all you've done for me. Or, I don't need 15 turs right now, but I know someone who would love to have a tur, right? So
tell people what a tur is, just so they know.
It's a seabird. It's where Newfoundland's the only legal place to hunt it in Canada. Much the size of like a small diver duck or whatever. And they still eat them like in Iceland, and they eat puffin in Iceland too. We can't eat puffin here. In the Faroe Islands.
Do they? Oh, no kidding.
I mean, puffin here is like people travel halfway across the world to come to Newfoundland and see a puffin. We can't eat them anymore. But turs are a big part of the diet here traditionally, and like savored and loved by mostly the old people. Most people don't eat them now, everyday people, but there's still lots. I interviewed a guy over on Fogo Island last time I was over, and he invited me over and showed me all. Like we sat down for hours. I recorded our conversation. He took me through generations of hunting over on Fogo Island, which is just off of Newfoundland. Very small, sparsely populated island, and just the way of life over there. I mean, that's the place you have to get you. You go out of your mind over there.
Yeah, I can't wait.
The stuff in the pantries and the bottled seal heart, and just the way that the food has been traditionally prepared, and everyone still puts up all their own salt fish, and everyone still bottles all their own stuff. They still live like really closer than we do here, because they don't have a big city like that. Anyway, it's so we give that stuff. To have an extra is luxury, and it is luxury only so that we can give it to someone else who will be appreciated. So it's always nice.
I that makes me just, a lot of times I give wild food that I've harvested, and processed in some way, and I give it to people, and I never know if it'll actually get used. But so it's kind of nice to hear about a place where, people are so lit up by it. But I kind of want to close out by talking about this generation, because the generation of people with this memory of food that we kind of started off talking about, they're the most at risk right now.
Yeah.
And the numbers in some places, New York City is a good example, are just so staggering. But outside of there, they're relatively low. But we're all doing very unsustainable mitigation right now. So we can't do this forever, and we're gonna have to go back out. And I understand this idea that's emerging of like, well, maybe we need to flip the equation and set the people who aren't at such high risk free from the shutdowns, and have the people who are more at risk kind of stay in. I don't see that really working long term. It seems to me that eventually this disease takes as many people as it takes, whatever you do, right? And that means we're going to lose a lot of this generation. And a lot of those folks. Okay, here's one of the things I think gets complicated is a lot of people who die from COVID were probably going to die that month anyway. They were going to die that year, that month, maybe that week, or even that day.
Right. That's the statistics out of it. It just is the story.
Yeah.
This is what it is.
But a lot of folks might have lived, years or many years more, and we'll lose them. So we're going to lose a lot of that generation, and that knowledge goes with them. And sometimes I hear the more kind of on the more coarse side of like, hey, it's not worth losing our economy for people who are old. And I it's not that I can't understand what they're saying. I get what they mean. However, I think like we have fallen so far from remembering the importance of our ancestors, and remembering the importance of our elders, and taking care of our elders, and our relations and such. So I just kind of want to close out with, a little bit more about, or get your thoughts on that, because here's this generation where if we don't kind of get their stories now, they go to the grave with those people. And
Mm-hmm.
it seems like what we can, looking around us right now, it's like obvious we're at this point where we need those stories. Because a lot of them are actually really practical,
Mm-hmm.
really useful things. So, just your sort of thoughts on losing this generation, or so many members of this generation, so quickly.
Yeah, it's hard to think about those stories being lost because I'm a true believer in how can you know who you are today if you don't know where you came from?
Hmm.
And the people and we've been built on these like our lives have been built on the backs of these people um, who persevered here, who stayed here against all odds. For all kinds of reasons, life was hard here in terms of um, the settlers that came here. We've only been settled really for less than 500 years, so we're still those stories of perseverance are still told all the time around the table, and it is what grows an appreciation for that generation. And so that will continue, whether it's this generation or the next generation. But
Hmm.
remembering and holding close to how hard these people worked to be able to give me a life here. And I'm sure
Hmm.
you can, that analogy or that can go right to, the war and globally. But here, we're very close to our the generations before us. We're very close to family, and you always walk away from the dinner table after hearing stories, and it's like that big sigh moment or that big deep breath that went like, one, how good do we have it today compared to? And
Hmm.
I think that needs to be the driving motivation towards passing on skills like those generations taught us to the next generation. I think it
Hmm.
is so vitally important. And yeah, while they might not, salt fish to get them through the winter, my grandfather used to say it best when he would talk about, the life's little things, right? And when we would go trouting, when freshwater trouting here, and he would say, "No, throw back the little ones. We'll catch it next year." And that was
Hmm.
how we grew up, close to the land and close to an understanding. And at the time, it didn't really sink in, of course. But now, when he says things like that, now it reminds me that's how they taught us to take care and to take care of the land, the waterways, the oceans, the seashores, the fish supplies. You know, um, that's how they taught us to take care. And so, how can we not? What are we going to be if we don't stop and take a moment to listen to the stories so that we can learn how to take care from them? It's on us to pass that stuff on now, but we have to get it first.
Yeah, I think that this is a time where people are really concerned about themselves, of course, and we need to remember that a lot of the mitigation we're doing isn't about us; it's about those folks.
Yeah.
And and some of the sacrifices we're making are for that reason. And I do think that everything needs to be balanced. You got to balance the mitigation with the economy, all that stuff. I know it all needs to be balanced, but I just think it's important that we remember these folks, and I just appreciate that you're gathering up some of those stories, because I know the relationships I have with some older folks who are mentors to me, they've really helped me in the last few years to sort of reorient my life a little bit to things that are more lasting. So anyway, Lori, thanks for
And
what you
they're
do.
home now, and they're lonely, and people are not going to visit them.
Yeah.
This
That's
is the time. Pick up the phone,
it. Hmm.
ask so and so. Down the how are you doing? How are you making out? Like here in Newfoundland, right? It's like, how are you making out? Wait, what was it like now this time of year? What would you be doing now, getting ready for this time of year? Now, when you were growing up, I mean,
Hmm.
that will change someone's day. Like that will
Yeah.
we're telling them by asking them that we want to hear that story, and that changes them. They're
Hmm.
fascinated by the fact that old fellows say, "What's a young girl like you want to know about that for?" And that to me is like, I take that as I'm honored that he would take the time to talk to me and that he recognizes that I actually want to know it,
Oh,
so reach out and talk to people and just listen to them. That's the most that we can do right now. Ask them about growing up, ask them about their food, or what they did at this time of year, or just anything, that's how we can take care of them right now too, in a big way. And then those are the stories then that you will have to pass on.
Yeah. Yeah. And that human to human connection and that changing of a person's day. Like, I could put up a post online and, a couple thousand people could like it and a whole bunch of people comment, and the actual impact that it has on them is so small compared to the impact you could have on one person's day by making that phone call. Like I think that's a bigger impact than a person gets from reading a post and going, oh, I'm kind of inspired, scroll to the next thing, versus somebody who's like on the edge a little bit and you can kind of bring them back in. So
take the time,
wow,
make impact, make a connection.
Mm-hmm. It's been a really good conversation. I'm really glad that we talked today, Lori. Thank you.
It's nice talking to you too, man.
Yeah, and I'm glad you guys are good up there. It seems like you guys will be good no matter what. But I like knowing you're up there. All right. So let's do that kind of obligatory thing here, and just I want to make sure people can follow up and find your work and all that. So tell people where to take a look, and we'll put that in the show notes.
Yeah, and I'm on Instagram at Eat It Wild, and at Cod Sounds. So just like it sounds, and I have a website at codsounds.ca. And that's where you'll find me.
And you don't think you'll be teaching classes this year then, huh?
I don't think the workshops, no, I don't think so. I'm, always reinventing and stuff and thinking of ways to do it, because the demand is there for people that want to learn about, so much of these traditional skills. But, let's hope for the fall.
Yeah. Okay, good. And I'll just say to folks, if you do get a chance to go out there and work with Lori, highly recommend. I got to spend, I think, 5 days working with you up there, making an episode of WildFed for season 2. So you'll all be able to see that hopefully soon. And also I know Kevin Coswin, who we had on the show a couple weeks ago, went and did an episode with you too. And he raves about his time there. So it's just a cool place. Lori's a cool person. So if you get a chance to go work with her, I really, really highly recommend it. Lori, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. We'll be in touch. Take care.
Thanks for listening to the WildFed Podcast. You can help us grow this show by subscribing and leaving us a rating and review. It ensures better rankings and more advertiser interest, which translates directly into better shows, more awesome guests, and a constant stream of fresh, new content. Have a question you'd like answered on the show, or a hunting, fishing, or foraging trip you'd like to host us on? Email us at info@wild-fed.com. And be sure to visit our website, wild-fed.com, to check out the WildFed video show and store. WildFed. Food is all around you.